Hello again. So, the Lethal Company. The internet likes it, and I like it. A lot. I've been hyperfixating on this game for a few weeks now, and I kind of made a thing. So, Lethal Company has a lot of really good things going for it, but the main thing that caught my eye was the cool-ass creatures that populate the facilities and outside of this game's moons. But we're not talking about the creatures that are actually in the game today. Well, we are, but, not really. See, I was intending to make a bestiary video on Lethal Company, and I still very much so want to, but the thing is that, the dev is kind of too good at their job. The game is presumably going to be continuously updated with more and more creatures as time goes on. There's already been one added in the Baboon Hawk, so I fear that if I commit to a full bestiary, it'll be outdated in like 2 weeks. So what I'm going to be doing instead of that is just kind of verbally jizzing my ideas out in all directions to be enjoyed by you and hopefully considered by the dev. I made these ideas and I got artists on my Discord server to draw them, so we're gonna start with a few item ideas I had, so sit back and enjoy. Starting off with the first item, the Healing Jelly. Bought from the company terminal, Healing Jelly is a reddish goo smelling of strawberries and raw meat, contained in a sealed plastic container. It's probably best not to ask where it comes from. This is a relatively simple entry. The Healing Jelly is a holdable utility item that doesn't weigh very much, and on use, restores 100% of the user's HP and cures poison, with 2 uses before it's gone. We'll get to what poison is later. This should be a reliable way to incentivize risks, allowing for a way to prolong missions after they get dangerous at the cost of potential supplies. Say, for example, your team spotted a Hoarding Bug nest, but they've already fucked up one of your main guys to low HP. Pop a Healing Jelly, and you have a chance to go in and fight them to get the important loot. I feel like it's nearly inevitable that the dev will add some way to heal at some point, but here's my hat in the ring in the form of an idea for some weird fucked up meat jelly that regenerates wounds. You could even give it some wet, gross noises while you use it too for the flavor. Not the literal flavor, that would be more like eating raw pork flavored Smucker's jelly, but, the aesthetic flavor of it. Yeah. Next up, the backpack. A common complaint of most players that I've seen is that the inventory is too small, so I bring you the backpack. A small utility backpack that gives you 1 more inventory slot for whatever one might need 1 more inventory slot for. However, keep in mind that you do still get weighed down if something heavy is in the backpack. And it's also rather expensive, so losing it is a relatively big deal. I think this would be a solid addition to allow later game teams to overcome the main problem of simply not having enough slots to carry the necessary utility and the scrap at the same time. And while I do like the inventory management part of the game, I think that the early game is made better for the lack of inventory slots. I feel like as quotas get more and more intensive, the game sort of lacks in ways to actually complete them, and that is very intentional, but I feel like more late-game scaling could definitely help, as the only real expensive stuff is zap guns, jetpacks, and cool decorations for the ship. Next up, the Boomstick. A bit more of an out-there idea for me, but hey, gun! The main thing I was surprised by when I first started playing was the lack of any real, reliable combat besides sitting on top of a railing with a shovel. And while that is good, I do like it, I feel like there should be an option adjacent to the zap gun that allows for dealing with enemies outside of standing on top of a spot where they can't reach you. So here's my idea. A single-shot, handicraft boomstick that breaks upon firing, but does enough damage to nuke most creatures if a solid meat shot is landed. It's quite heavy, heavier than a shovel or sign, and can only be found as scrap on moons. It's quite lucrative to sell, but you obviously don't have that ticket out of any bad encounter if you do sell it off to the company. The exploded version that comes after you fire it, unfortunately, isn't quite as lucrative, only selling for around as much as a tattered metal sheet. I'm not entirely sure if this would be a good idea to add, but for later game runs, a boomstick would certainly be a lucky find that would give an additional option to help you wipe a bracken off the fucking map if you felt like it. Anyways, the last item on our list is the Handheld Radar. A godsend for solo runs, the Handheld Radar would be a very expensive piece of machinery that allows the player to see a POV of the ship radar. They wouldn't be able to open doors, but they would be able to see the top-down view of the facility, as well as any scrap or wildlife near them. Just another thing to expand the late game a bit more through more expensive but very useful utility items. Plus, as mentioned, it would be massive for solo players who are otherwise kind of fucked in terms of their game experience, as they more often than not have to work 4 times as hard with a 4 times slimmer margin of error. But anyways, that's all my item ideas. Now let's keep up the pace by moving on to how I would change some of the current creatures that are in the game. Starting off with the Manta Coils, the weird crows with 4 wings that are on almost every moon. The bestiary entry for the Manta Coils states that they could be potentially dangerous if angered, so why not make that potential into a reality? If you harass a Manta Coil a bit too much by, say, chasing it around, it will eventually start to circle around your head, constantly squawking and alerting forest guardians, worms, and eyeless dogs as to your location if they have spawned in. If you stay outside, they could also start to peck at you for slight damage, or even start to knock small things like flashlights and walkie-talkies out of your hands. Respect the birds. Next up, how would I change the Hoarding Bugs? Now, I love the Hoarding Bugs, they're my favorite little men, but I have an idea to make them even cooler. Right now, Hoarding Bugs technically have a nest area that they store their shit in, but it's damn near impossible to tell where that nest is because there are no visual indicators. Could there perhaps be designated rooms around the bunker of Hoarding Bug nests, individual room layouts on the far end that spawn 2 to 5 Hoarding Bugs depending on the difficulty? I don't know, maybe have their nests be defined by things like secretions or some sort of silk on the walls that they use to attach scrap to. Perhaps instead of just dropping scrap on the ground, they literally attach it to the wall or floor with some silk, and you have to hold the input to pull the scrap out of the silk. Make a Hoarding Bug nest feel like a bug nest, you know, not just a room with scrap in it. Also, I think a bit of a missed opportunity is the potential for Hoarding Bug trading. The obvious one comes with paying a Hoarding Bug to leave you alone or de-aggro by giving it a piece of scrap, but I think it would also be neat if you could trade with a Hoarding Bug by giving it a piece of scrap and having it give you the piece of scrap that it was holding. So you could potentially trade a cheap piece like a torn metal sheet for an expensive piece like a brass bell. They wouldn't know better, look at those eyes. They're not thinking. Anyways, Forest Guardians. Forest Guardians are probably the only part of the game that I genuinely dislike, so here's how I would rework these walking wooden problem children. Right now, if a Forest Guardian sees you, you are more often than not just fucked, unless you're near the entrance of the ship or have a stun grenade. The fact that they spawn on almost every moon too makes them the biggest and most dangerous outside enemy by far, because every other one besides maybe a large pack of baboon hawks is counterable by specific methods. Forest Guardians are faster than you, have incredible vision, can still hear despite that, and are super common. So hear me out. What if instead of always eating you after they grab you, the Forest Guardian will run over to you, grab you like normal, and then just kinda hold you there, maybe fuck with you for a bit and do a bit of damage? The log does describe them as curious in a toddler-esque way, so what if once they get a hold of you, you have to stay silent, hands off the keyboard, make no sounds or motions, any inputs, and hope that they put you down, thinking you're just a weird inanimate object? It'd still be a % chance, they might still eat you either way, gotta keep them scary, but it'd add a little bit of engagement to a forest giant encounter. It would make them feel more dynamic, rather than simple monsters who look at a thing and kill it. If this doesn't work, maybe after they eat someone, they'd just get bored of people and would wander off and spare the other employees or something. I don't know, maybe all my ideas for them are bad, but I do genuinely hope that something is done about them, because they're way too oppressive for how common they are. Whenever they spawn, you're just sort of stuck hoping that they don't see you without too many ways to break line of sight. It's genuinely annoying in a not very fun way. Anyways, speaking of genuinely annoying in a not very fun way, Thumpers. Thumpers are very similar to the Forest Guardian in the way that they are damn near impossible to avoid under most circumstances. Right now, Thumpers' main counterplay is to completely avoid the area that they're in, or optionally cheese them with a railing. But I feel like a creature that's completely and totally cutting off an area of the facility unless you cheese it is questionable game design. It should be a feasible risk to get potentially great rewards, not certain death unless you hop on a slightly raised platform. So what if we reworked the way the Thumper functions? What if when the Thumper sees an employee, they will roar loudly, like usual, wind up, and then charge down towards them? If the employee is hit with the charge, they will be stunned briefly as the Thumper grabs them in its mouth and slams it into the inevitable wall at the end of the tunnel. This charge will automatically bring an employee down to limping with critical health, but also would stun the Thumper if they do hit a wall. This means you can play a bit of a bullfight game with the Thumper, forcing it to slam into walls to get a free shovel hit in. But if you get hit by the charge, you basically would instantly die. It makes avoiding a Thumper easier, but also makes them easier to challenge. Generally, I don't mind the Thumper. I find them cool. I just think that they could be reworked a bit. With the system as it is now, creatures that just see you and kill you immediately don't really function if they're this significantly faster than you are. Either way, if you hate my idea, just make them incapable of going through vents. They're way too big either way. Anyways, that's all my creature changes for the main game at the moment. Let's get into the meat of the video. The new creature ideas I had. Starting out with what is not a creature, but a mechanic. Poison, or venom, I suppose. Poison, upon being applied through a sting or a bite by one of the new creatures I'm going to add, deals 4% of the target's maximum HP per second, killing in 25 seconds if unattended to. Poison can be cured by healing jelly, giving another reason to keep it around. I was tempted to give it something like a slow effect as your dude slowly dies from the poison in their veins, but honestly I think this is good enough as is. But now that we have the simple numbers lined out, let's get started on the 3 creature ideas I had that could utilize this poison. The first of which being the Cyclops Serpent, a pest that spawns outside of the facility. Cyclops Serpents are brown and green snakes that slither through the tall grass or arid wastelands of the early moons. When a player walks too close to the Cyclops Serpent, it will shake its rattle, letting loose a foreboding noise, telling the person to walk away from it. If they continue, though, it will enter into its second phase of threat display, where it will rear up and display a large, threatening, false eyeball and intimidating-looking crest, and letting out a loud hiss. If the player continues to harass the serpent, it will eventually bite, doing a little bit of damage and applying poison. The serpent will then slither away. The serpent has what some would say would be an extensive amount of threat displays, all designed to ward off would-be predators. It could be that this serpent lives a life constantly on the run from things that would seek to crush or consume it. Gameplay-wise, this little idiot would be primarily good for keeping people on their toes outside the bunker to make sure that they don't walk into a snake. Next up, the Weeping Beetle. A large insect painted in browns and greens. The Weeping Beetle will oftentimes hide inside of warm, dark places, leading to a large amount of them ending up inside the bunker map on forest moons like March or Vow. Weeping bugs will be heard before they are seen, as they will occasionally emit a loud, sobbing sound, like a human loudly crying. This sound will surely cause some poop in the pants of frightened employees, but the beetle is mostly harmless, merely using this strange-sounding call to look for mates inside of the bunkers. However, if one gets too close to a beetle as it rests on the walls, it will suddenly puff out its wing cases, flapping its wings and releasing a cloud of toxic dust that previously coated its wing membranes. This predictably applies poison to all units that inhale the toxic cloud. However, upon using this cloud, the beetle is helpless as the dust harmlessly disperses after 10 or so seconds. If you find yourself with no other ways to go besides a pathway that is blocked by a beetle, baiting it to use its cloud is a good, if risky, way to get past it. Otherwise, you should probably just leave him alone. Next up, the Veiled Weaver. A terrifying arachnid that hides its form beneath a deceptive guise. The Veiled Weaver is our final creature to utilize poison, and our first truly dangerous creature listed in this video. On the first glance, a Veiled Weaver looks like a simple plague doctor, cloaked in a strange black robe made of hair, with an eyeless, pale, bird-like face ending in a sharp, pointed beak. The true nature of the Weaver comes if you look at the base of that silken hair-like covering, where yellowish eyes and chitinous feelers emerge. Employees can often see the Veiled Weaver standing at the end of long hallways, as if observing them. Its goal is to hopefully trigger some curiosity from the employees. If one were to get too close to the Weaver, though, they'd be met with a surprise as the thing's face lunges towards them. The true form of the Weaver is that of a gargantuan, lanky scorpion, with the pointed face being nothing more than the oddly shaped stinger tip of the scorpion's tail. However, after injecting the target with a lethal dose of venom, the Weaver will run away and proceed to watch from afar. There would be no reason to expend energy to fight a full-strength creature when it could just let the venom do the work. The Weaver will watch ominously from just out of sight, only its eyes being visible in the darkness. It will follow at that distance for quite some time. Eventually, it will grow tired of stalking, however. Around 20 seconds after the sting, if the target has not cured their poison, and is weakened by it, it will charge past and grab a hold of the weakened prey with its claws, and drag the body away to be consumed elsewhere. This peculiar hunting behavior could be an evolutionary countermeasure to hunters that would otherwise seek to predate on or attempt to scare away humanoid creatures which the veiled form seems to mimic. If a large creature like a Thumper would approach the Veiled Weaver, either to attempt to hunt it or to simply chase it out of its territory, it would quickly be stung and killed, as the venom is easily enough to put a creature its size in the ground. The easiest way to avoid dying to a Veiled Weaver is simply to not engage with it. Just leave it alone. It will more or less never engage with you on its own terms. Though additionally, if you have a method to cure poison or feel like sacrificing a life, an employee can easily run it into a corner and beat it to death with a shovel if it's in a bad position. Though it is entirely possible that they just get stung and the creature runs away to a position that would be a bit too hard to follow it into. Next up, the Ningo. Found exclusively in or near water, these aquatic freshwater hunters resemble a strange chimeric mixture between a Hina doll and a river eel, though they only have ancestry with the latter. Their main feature is their pale human-like face, which is contradicted by their deep black fishy body. This long, slender, and slimy body allows them to swim at incredible speeds through water towards prey. They will oftentimes stick to quiet ponds, but they will become much more active as the area floods and they get access to new hunting opportunities. As the water rises, Ningo will begin to grow more active, spawning only in waters deep enough for the employees to drown in. Upon spotting prey, they will rush it, their face shifting from that regular peaceful expression to one of screaming rage and bloodlust. They will deliver constant shredding bites to prey that fall into the water, circling it and devouring it like piranhas. In order to tell if a Ningo resides in a pond, one can simply wait and see if it sticks its face above the water. They do this not only to bask, but to breathe, as Ningo have developed lungs that give them the ability to survive for hopefully enough time to return to water if stranded after a flood. Though this behavior of poking their heads out of the water to breathe is also quite eerie, as the employees will only see a pale doll face watching them from the water's surface. The easiest way to avoid a Ningo attack is to simply not enter into pools of water that are deeper than chest height for a long enough time for them to notice you. However, once an employee dies in the water, the Ningo will ignore all future prey as they will be busy chowing down on their recent meal. This also allows for employees to drop a corpse which could have previously died in a past engagement inside the bunker into the water to lure the Ningo away as they get past. The next creature is the polyp welt. A strange, sessile creature that spends most of its life glued to the walls of the facility interior, the polyp welt looks like a large, tumorous mass of wrinkled skin, around the size of your torso. They sit on walls, usually at dead ends, and wait for something to walk past. They use an acute sense of smell to determine when something new is in front of them, and when they sense something, they will start out by making a loud gurgling sound, a warning to leave the area, before they then open an array of eyes along the exterior of the welt. If the welt sees any viable prey, then it will open and launch out a bony harpoon that stabs deep into its victim. Backwards-facing barbs make the harpoon nearly impossible to pull out as the polyp welt begins to reel their prey in towards the open mouth. The only way to free a friend from this fate is to run up to the polyp welt and smack them in the eye, which will cause them to shield their main body and dislodge the harpoon, taking a few seconds to get back to their hunting behavior and allowing the employees to hopefully pass by. Biologically, this creature seems to be a colonial organism, formed of individual microscopic flesh cells. The mimicry of human anatomy is disturbing and leads scientists to believe this could be some form of mutated human cancer cell, which has evolved to survive and reproduce on their own. When they find good hunting grounds, they will slowly form, primarily feasting on small insects before moving up to small mammals, and then to anything big enough to consume. Young polyp welts can also be found around the facility, and will oftentimes open their large singular eye to watch you walk past. Though keep in mind that the presence of young welts could imply the presence of the mature specimen around any corner. Next up, the false walls. Loosely inspired by another game from the Lethal Company dev, It Steals, the false walls are strange creatures that resemble simple brick walls within the bunker. In truth, beneath the brick-esque facade, they are strange amorphous plant-like creatures who lie dormant for most of their life. They seem to be resting and are relatively hard to wake up. A false wall will spend most of its time resting in doorways, which could easily be mistaken for the bricked-up doorways found around the bunker. If any creature wanders up to the false wall and creates enough vibrations, either by running near it or hitting it with a shovel, it will wake up, releasing tens of small barbed tendrils and lashing the creature for hefty damage. After the assault, the false wall will return to dormancy, but after leaving the line of sight of all the employees present, it will move to another doorway to resume its slumber. It doesn't seem to eat the remains of those it kills, so it could be that this lashing out is a purely defensive endeavor. No false walls have ever been taken into custody, as they're too heavy to move by traditional means and nearly unkillable without completely destroying the innards of the creature in the process. So scientists truly have little proof besides eyewitness testimony to theorize off of. In order to avoid a false wall, either bait it to attack by running past it quickly, or ignore it if it's not blocking anything important. The final creature on the list is the Stranger. An unusual entity, the Stranger is deceptive in its nature, and nobody is truly aware of what they actually look like, only their hunting strategy. The presence of a Stranger on a mission is hard to detect at first, but an eerie emptiness should be noted, as Strangers seem to hunt all denizens of the facilities, leaving no other creatures besides itself. Additionally, a facility with a Stranger will always have its power permanently off. A breaker box will not spawn. As the employees explore the area, the Stranger will listen to them, playing an array of sounds like footsteps or doors opening, before eventually moving on to mimicking voices, repeating the voices of their party members, or even the employee's own voice back to them. The main thing one might notice when in a facility with a Stranger is that there are seemingly no dead ends. Every single pathway you take only spiders outwards into a seemingly infinite maze. As the employees walk deeper into this labyrinth, the stranger will grow more aggressive and begin to manifest visual hallucinations, the most notable of which being another employee wandering the halls, who will vanish after leaving the field of vision of the other employees. If any individual ever leaves the group, they will mysteriously find themselves being permanently separated from their co-workers, only hearing distant, muffled voices coming from ahead. As they wander this endless dark maze, there is a very small chance they might stumble upon the main entrance again, but if they do not, their fate is sealed. As the individual is wandering down the endless hallway, they'll hear their teammates' voices coming from ahead, and the maze will turn into a straight line of rooms with no branching paths, ending in a red light that would denote a fire exit. But as they approach their perceived salvation, they recognize that that light isn't what they thought it was, but something else entirely. Something much more sinister. It is at this point that the stranger consumes them. If you find yourself suspecting a stranger's presence, stay together, and no matter what, remember the path you took. Getting lost is more often than not a guaranteed death. Scientists still have no idea if the stranger is even a biological creature or just an eerily consistent bout of mass hysteria among paranoid employees. But if you ever feel as though something is watching you from the darkness, or if you hear your own voice echoed back to you, it's best not to stay too long, lest you meet your end in a place far beyond human understanding. But anyways, those are some ideas I had for new things that could be added to Lethal Company. If you want me to make more videos like this, just tell me. I will always have more ideas. And Zeekers, if you're watching this, thanks. You don't actually have to make any of this. I just think it would be cool if you did. You should definitely leave a comment, though. I will pin it. Anyways, that's all. Play Lethal Company. It's a great game. Alright, that's all. Leave.